What's up, guys? Nate, the old school otaku here, and as you can see, I've got multiple different copies of Armitage the Third. And what I really want to talk to you guys about today is, well, what did this show teach me? If you want to find out more, stay tuned. And welcome back. So let's go ahead and let's clear the air here a little bit, and let me tell you guys exactly what I'm thinking of as far as making this video is concerned. Because to be honest, when I first saw Movies with Mikey's video on what anime or what animation taught us or taught him, which he talked about a few different animation and anime shows and the things that he really learned coming out of those, I knew I wanted to do something like that. And he actually called out and put a call out to people to do something very similar, to talk about, you know, animation and what they've learned from it and all that. So if you want to, you know, find out more information about that, his channel and whatnot, I'll have some links in the description below regarding that. And of course, if you came by way of this video due to, you know, from his channel or whatnot, welcome, enjoy, I hope. Yeah, so I was originally planning on trying to do this for a different show, something that that at the time I felt had a lot more of an impact to me. But, you know, as time went on, you know, things happened, a few things changed in my life, and, you know, it's been a interesting couple of months here for me on the channel. But, well, it wasn't until I was browsing through Facebook and I ran across a post from Otaku Joe. Those of you who know my channel should know Otaku Joe by now, my dealer of the Laserdisc variety and amongst other things. He made a post on Facebook, or the channel made a post on Facebook, and he basically has a copy of Slayers on DVD, like the full complete Funimation Slayers DVD set that got damaged in shipping, apparently, and he was giving it away. And what he wanted was to see a picture of your most prized collection or prized piece of your collection, or the thing that got you into collecting. And unfortunately, my most prized piece of my collection is not here in the house. It's actually in storage, and it would be difficult to get to. So I decided, you know what? I know what I have here, and I know I can find the very first piece I ever owned. And what that is Armitage the Third on VHS. I originally got this at a Best Buy in my hometown. Well, I guess it's not in my hometown. We actually had to cross the state line from Kentucky to Indiana in order to get a copy of this, because Best Buy was in the big city in Indiana, not in the little town that we lived in. So we were there, it was for my birthday, and I saw this on the shelf. And I always looked at the anime section when I was when we'd go to stores and whatnot, and it was always very little. It was a small town, you know, in the 90s, not a whole lot of stuff there. In fact, what is there now in a lot of ways is indicative to things that I used to special order back in the day. But this was on the shelf, and I had originally seen Armitage the Third Polymatrix, the movie version with Kiefer Sutherland and Elizabeth Berkley, voicing characters of Ross Syllabus and Naomi Armitage. I'd seen that there, saw this exact VHS tape there, and I knew I wanted it because I'd seen this on SciFi about a year or so before that, visiting my grandparents up in Michigan, which I now live in the Detroit area. But at the time I wasn't living there. I was visiting, and they had SciFi on the local channels. We didn't. Back by us. So I got a chance to actually see some anime and whatnot, and this was, I believe Armitage was what played on Monday. It's either on Monday or on Wednesday. I don't remember which played first, Armitage or Iria, because it was Armitage, it was Iria, it was Green Legend Ron, and I think that was about it for the whole week. It was like a week of anime that they had playing there. But I saw this and on the shelf, and I knew I had to get it. So I begged my parents to buy it, and at the time, my mother didn't think to really look too heavily into this, and decided to get it for me. Of course, at the time, if she had actually looked deeper into it, she would have seen some potential nudity on the back cover. Nothing's really being shown there, but there's a lot more adult themes in Armitage than what my parents at the time would have preferred young little me having seen. And I'm pretty sure none of those scenes were in the version on SciFi. It was shown during prime time. But either way, they picked it up for me, and I am eternally grateful for that fact. I know I got I got bitched out pretty hard when I had brought this with me to. We were at a soccer tournament for my brother, and I was watching it on the portable VHS TV and whatnot that we had in the room. And my mother walks in right as there's a scene of a woman basically posing for a painter in it, and she's naked, full on. You can see nipples, you can see bush, you can see the whole 9 yards. Well, I mean, you can't. There's not a whole lot more definition beyond that. They don't really. There isn't really any sex scenes or anything like that in this. Japanese law wouldn't even necessarily allow you to show any of that, but there was some of that, and of course, go figure, mother walks in at that point and she's like, "Where did you get this?" And I'm like, "You bought it for me 9 years ago." And she's like, "Oh." But yeah, all of that beside, when I was getting all of these out and getting out the VHS, going through my VHS collection, which is still in boxes right now, going through my Laserdisc collection, which for the most part is also still in boxes, and then obviously going up here on the wall into my DVD collection and finding each and every single one of the versions of Armitage I have on DVD, I realized this was the show I needed to talk about. So let's really talk about that. And I know this is a pretty long intro to get into the meat and heart of things. But if you're new to this channel, this is pretty normal for me, because there's a lot of nostalgia that goes into my anime collecting and whatnot, and where I've been and how it's molded me and how I've grown up with this, as it were. So like I said, I have quite a bit of these here, and it's stuff I had to collect. I mean, ever since I had the chance to start really collecting, I knew I needed Armitage in just about every format I could get, which is why I sought out this Laserdisc copy of Armitage of the Third. This is Polymatrix. This is not the OVA. This is the movie edition, which means, and the interesting thing about Polymatrix is that Polymatrix doesn't have a Japanese dub. It only has the English dub and Japanese subtitles, because the Japanese actually preferred this version, this version here, over top of the original OVA version, which is on this DVD here. And some of the voices obviously are different between the OVAs and whatnot, and I'm still looking for the OVAs. on Laserdisc. There's a couple of different versions. I've got the VHS here. I've got the dual disc collection, which has the original Polymatrix movie as well as the Dual Matrix movie, which was the sequel that had come out. If I remember correctly, this was the set I had actually bought to get me Dual Matrix. I don't have a separate copy of Dual Matrix that I can tell. You've got Armitage the Third, the OVA version, which was released by Pioneer. All of this was released by Pioneer, but obviously Pioneer became Geneon. Geneon closed down, and so Funimation actually picked it up. And so there's a Anime Classics version of Armitage that you can pick up as well from Funimation, and this includes Armitage the Third. This includes, it's got the Polymatrix. It's got the OVAs on it as well as Dual Matrix. So it has both movies, the OVAs, which is really cool, and this is the version to get nowadays, if you can find it still. I don't think it's out of print necessarily, but I might be wrong. It's always hard to tell with things like this. So let's dig in to Armitage and everything. So for the most part, I'm really going to be talking about the movie. They're going to be talking about this one right here, Polymatrix. Dual Matrix is okay. A lot of people poo on it and whatnot, but it was good for what it was, and what it wasn't what all of us who had seen Polymatrix wanted. We were expecting something on the lines of a bit of an action and whatnot, but a cerebral story dealing with complex social issues and things like that in this cyberpunk style. But what we got was basically just an action film that had a little bit of dynamic and character development and whatnot. A little bit of melodrama. Dealing with the two main characters, with Armitage, Ross Syllabus, and their child. And if you hadn't realized there are going to be spoilers by now, I'm sorry guys, they're spoilers. Polymatrix came out in the 90s, Dual Matrix came out in 2000, 2001, around that time, so you gotta expect spoilers if you haven't seen this before, and I recommend you do go watch it. All of it, actually. It's pretty good. There is a different storyline between the movie and the OVAs. The movie is a cut-up version of the OVAs with some extra scenes and stuff added on, and it does have a slightly different storyline than the OVAs, but the OVAs are pretty good on their own, too. Dual Matrix was pretty good for what it was. It just wasn't what any of us were expecting, and probably the most disappointing thing about Dual Matrix for me is that it was completely computer animated, completely done with CG and computer animated techniques, which it was one of the first movies, if I remember correctly, that used full digital animation. And so there aren't any cells for me to buy, and that's probably the most egregious thing about it. In my eyes, is that I can't own any cells. I could go find dogas from it, the line arts and whatnot that were drawn, but I can't find the actual cells themselves because they don't exist. Not that finding Polymatrix cells is easy. I've been searching for quite some time and haven't really found many, and what I have found have been a little bit more expensive than I'm willing to pay for. But I digress. Let's talk about the movie. So, like I said, I got this movie very early on in my life, as it were. I was very young at the time when I first saw this. I was spending a week during my summer vacation with my grandparents when I first saw it, and it never really quite hit me as hard the first time watching it as it has in subsequent watchings, where I could really dig into the story and really see what all it's trying to tell me, as it were, because there is a very interesting and complex story with this, and in the end it really kind of molded back into my life and kind of helped pushed me forward in a lot of ways if I really think about it. Because I mean, it's an interesting idea and storyline. I mean, a lot of the early '90s, a lot of the '90s cyberpunk, storylines and things like that, borrowing from, and even back in the '80s with some of the cyberpunk, you got Bubblegum Crisis, you've got Ghost in the Shell, you've got Armitage the Third, and a lot of that stuff kind of boiled down, from, from the characters from Blade Runner and all of that too. Is that, there's really this idea of self and what is self, but also, what really makes a person a human, as it were. Because, I mean, Ghost in the Shell kind of deals with the idea of what is a ghost, what is a ghost, what makes a person a human. Is it because they have a ghost? Well, what happens if, you've got this intelligence that's, developed from the internet effectively, and it thinks, it feels, it has a mind of its own. Is that also human? Is that also a ghost? What happens when, when that were to potentially merge with a, with a human or your ghost? Could you make a child out of that? Things like that. Kind of the ideas behind all of that. And obviously, it was posed in Blade Runner, the idea of I want more life. Even though I am created by man, I still am alive. I still have feelings. I still have thoughts. Even if a lot of like my whole past was implanted on me, I'm still a person in a lot of ways. But they played with a lot of these ideas, and the big notion that Armitage wound up playing with was also in those veins, but what makes a person a person? And one of the key lines that Naomi says in it, is, if humans don't want me, why did they create me? And kind of as the storyline of Armitage winds up going, there's the main character, Ross Syllabus, he is transferring from Earth. He worked as a police officer on Earth, and he's transferred to Mars as a as a policeman, and he did that to kind of get away from the problem of his partner having been killed, and his partner was killed by a robot. And so he kind of has this, problem with robots, but at the same time, he's part robot himself. He's, effectively a cyborg at this point because his leg's been amputated in a way where he has a robotic knee, and he's coming over, and apparently in the process, one of a country western singer who happened to be on the same plane as him gets murdered and killed, and he winds up tracking down the killer, with who would wind up becoming his partner, Armitage, Naomi, the titular character, winds up finding her in the airport, and they team up in order to try and track down the guy who killed that country western singer. And eventually, he finds out that this western singer was a robot and whatnot. And then there's a rash of other robot killings, and these are people who looked like normal people as far as everybody was considered. They had, they were creative, they had thoughts, they had, minds of their own. They weren't the standard robots that everybody's used to. They call them the seconds, the second model, as it were, where they have some, thought, but for the most part they're very obedient. But these thirds, as they eventually wound up calling them, were designed to basically emulate real people. They're designed to basically be real, despite the fact that they were man-made robots. And so the bad guy, Jean-Claude, basically is going around killing these robots in order to... There's some political story behind it, Earth and Mars eventually wanting to combine forces. The thirds were designed as a way to as a way to bolster birth rates on Mars, because they wanted to be an independent nation, an independent world, as it were, and really gain their independence. But they relied on Earth for immigration in order to bolster their numbers. They just didn't have good enough birth rates, as it were, and so the idea of a third, robot that could conceive, that could actually have children, because that was the big thing, was that country western singer was pregnant. She had a baby who unfortunately died in the process, but that was a thing that supposedly these thirds could potentially do and have, and so they're tracking him down, trying to find it, and eventually, they find him. In the process, Ross learns that Naomi is also a third. And she disappears after the realization comes out. And the two of them, she kind of goes off on her own to try and track down her father, who happens to be the creator of the thirds, major designer for all of these. And together, they kind of team up and whatnot. Ross finds her again. He doesn't care so much that she is a robot, despite the fact that he has this prejudice towards robots because of all of this. And of course, this whole entire time, you've got background imagery of, people out on the streets and petitioning and picketing and all this other stuff, saying robots steal our jobs. Get rid of robots, they're taking our jobs. I mean, there's a character in it, the painter I talked about earlier. She gets outed by Jean-Claude on TV, and these rioters destroy her home, enter in her home, pull her out and burn her on a pile of other robots. And effectively kill her. And she actually apparently held a list of all of the thirds. She had a list of all of them, and so she wound up, before she, finally bit the dust, wound up transferring all of that to Armitage, which helped with some of the investigation, as it were. But I mean, there's this whole thing of this painter, beautiful painter, and she's friends with her model and whatnot, and her model is just like Jessica is all she could really say. They took her. She's distraught because her friend, her partner was taken away, and they show a lot of these scenes of these in the police investigation and whatnot, the humans who knew these thirds, who knew these people, they really emotionally attached to these effectively inferior, non-real beings, and but they're distraught. The one guy, the manager of the country western singer, is in a dive bar just drowning his sorrows in liquor. And it's kind of implied that, they were seeing each other and it was his baby, potentially, as well. There's no real distinct information about that in the movie, but it's kind of implied, as it were. So they go throughout the whole entire time. They wind up finding Naomi's father, and he has kind of been driven mad. He's a little mixed up in the head and kind of crazy, and he's working on fourths. He's working on this new model and whatnot that is even more real, in order to help terraform Mars and all this other stuff. And they and in the process, he kind of really comes to for a little bit and winds up fixing Naomi, as it were. He says, you're now a real girl, because Naomi never had the ability added into her to be pregnant. So supposedly, after this point, she could become pregnant. And then there's a scene later on where Ross is sitting with her, and they've got a fire out front, outside, where this dome on Dunwich Hill, as they call it, that Dr. Asakura is sitting at. Her father, they've got a little fire out there, and Naomi's kind of kind of pouting, kind of crying a little bit, not too happy because of everything that she's had to deal with, and the fact that her father isn't exactly who she thought he was. He's a little crazy now, and also, coming to the realization that, she was designed to be a battle robot, not necessarily a real girl, as she was kind of led to believe. So she has a bit of a character development moment, a shattering of her own mind, her own ideas, going into that. And they're her and Ross are talking, and eventually the two of them kind of sit there and they're like, we love each other. They realize that they both have fallen in love with each other. They both love each other. And, by this point, Ross is half robot at this point. He's got his leg replaced. He got his arm replaced. He got quite a few other things replaced due to a, massive battle that he had with a, with a giant Jean-Claude. There's multiple of them in the movie because they're all different bioroids, assassin roids as they were. There's like the original, who's a human, who worked with all of them, but then there's also all of these other roids, which her, Armitage, is supposed to be one of these models. She's just a female version of these models, and they find out that all of the thirds that were then developed were all female, minus one, Julian, who's a boy, who was the last model made of these thirds, and all of this other stuff that they find out, and they kind of look at each other and like, I love you, Naomi, and she's like, but I'm a robot. And he's like, I don't care. I'm half robot too. What does it matter? I know a person when I see them. You are as human as anybody else. So, and they have this heartfelt sex scene, and you don't have to show it. They didn't show it, but you knew that's what happened. And they wake up. Their friends from the police department call them and kind of give them a heads up that the dome has become a military attack target. Basically, the Earth government has finally decided to merge with the government of Mars and all this other stuff, and so they're going to blow them up and whatnot. And so they get out early enough. They try to help her help her father out. He doesn't want to leave. He elects to actually stay behind and basically get killed by her, or get killed in the process. And actually, no, I think it's at that point that he fixes her. He has a moment of clarity, and he operates on her and fixes her and gives her some upgrades, some really, really cool upgrades. And they go. They leave. They get out in time and whatnot. And then there's this ending scene, and the OVA had it. So did the movie. The real ending scene changed between the two, but the OVA the movie has this scene where they have become terrorists effectively. They elected to become terrorists by trying to find the original Jean-Claude. They basically broke into this secure medical facility that he's being kept in order to talk to him and get some information from him, in order to find Dr. Asakura. So they're kind of military attack targets. They are enemies of the state, enemies of the Mars government at this point. And so they are they're pitted on this battlefield, this desert of Mars. Two people, just Armitage and Ross, who happen to have this giant battle armor, but still two people against a legion of robots and military attack vehicles and all this other stuff. And you realize at that point, they're two people up against an army. They're just out there. And so they go in, the scene shows them attacking, and the whole entire time, you're not hearing the sounds of gunfire and the sounds of battle and explosions. You'll hear little bits and pieces throughout that, but the sound design really, really hits home a lot of the things, because as that's going on, you get interspersed scenes of these seconds going about their daily routines, but then seeing the TV screens that are everywhere in this universe, and they're seeing static, but they're actually seeing this battle play out effectively in this static. Nobody else, the humans aren't seeing any of this. It's just the thirds, and they're watching as these two people fight to survive against all odds. Despite the fact that, yes, Armitage is a badass bioroid at this point, and she is packing some heavy artillery. She's got arm lasers and shoulder lasers. She's got these angelic wings that allows her to fly and all of this other cool stuff. And she's just like super beefed up. And of course, Ross has this giant battle armor and blowing things up. But obviously, they're up against some pretty nasty odds, so they're not doing too hot and whatnot. But this whole entire time, you've got this very low-key, solemn song playing that, between the juxtaposition of the scenes of the seconds, looking on and seeing the battle, and the actual scenes of the battle, kind of mixes together and makes you kind of think. And it's one of those thought pieces where you're just sitting there and you're like, this is happening, but why is this happening at the same time? Does this need to happen? And in a way, it almost seems like the seconds are being shown just in a lot of ways, like the servitude and whatnot that they're stuck in. And so it's hard to really describe it without really seeing and watching the scene. If nothing else, that's the scene you should really see. I think it really plays to what the show is, what Armitage is, what it all kind of is. And in the end, yeah, they survive. They finish, and you see them crossing over a hill and looking down into the city that they've sworn to protect, the city that they love. And they're like, it's time to go back. It's time to continue. And the whole entire time, Ross comes to this realization. He's just like, at the end, he basically just says, you know what? I'm a simple man. I was raised a simple man. All I need is a small home, a roof over my head, room enough for me and you, me and just two people, me and you. Who cares if the rest of the world is out to kill you? Who cares if the rest of the world hates you? I love you, and that's all that matters. And of course, Armitage, Naomi, looks up at him, and I think he's carrying her at this point, and that's something to kind of, also kind of sum up the whole thing, is that, he's standing there with her in his arms. He, a lowly human, is carrying this robot, and she just kind of, stands, not stands up, but she sits up in his arms, and then puts her arms around his shoulder. And looking over his shoulder, she just says, do you think there's room for three in this little house that you care about? And he just kind of laughs a little and is like, well, when that happens, I guess we'll have to think of something. And that then leads into dual matrix and the two of them having a child and all this other stuff. But all of that coming in, all of the the storyline, everything there really kind of, to me at the time, and I didn't even realize it watching it, is that it really kind of ingrained a lot of these ideas of what makes a person a person. I mean, everybody's different, and at the same time, you don't have to necessarily be human to be human, and at the same time you could be human but also not human in a lot of ways, due to how you treat your fellow man, how you kind of handle all of this other stuff. And at the time, this was a very profound thing to sit down and watch, to sit down and listen to and see, because it really got me thinking about life, about what is life, what is meaning, how to be your own person, and how to persevere based off of your convictions, based off of what you wish and will to be. And it's one of those things that, to me, kind of pulled me through some dark spots growing up. I mean, full disclosure, I was not the most liked person in my, elementary, junior high, high school years. I mean, I had friends, not a ton, but I had friends. I had acquaintances and whatnot, and but there was also a lot of picking, a lot of bullying and things that I had to endure, and I did endure. But it was things like this story here, that really kind of showed me that despite adversity, you can pull through and be more and make yourself more. And it's things like this that molded me and pushed me forward through a lot of these adverse times that I had dealt with growing up. I mean, and obviously it's not it's not anything to say that, I had a bad childhood or any of that stuff. I mean, I had a loving family. I had, everything kind of, just about everything I wanted was given to me. I did not grow up harshly by a lot of terms, but there also was a lot of things I had to deal with. Growing up, I had, like I said, there was a lot of bullying, a lot of things. I had weeds and stuff shoved in my mouth and beaten up and berated and laughed at, and all of that emotional trauma that I think a lot of people have dealt with. But in fact, at least in the geek side of things, growing up, a lot of us have dealt with things like that. But seeing shows like this that really kind of made you think a little bit and really kind of internalize, or look upon yourself and see what you want to be, really kind of brought out a lot of the perseverance and things that I had then later taken on into my persona. There's the whole thing of you get knocked down. Do you stay down or do you pick yourself back up again? And Armitage kind of taught me that I should pick myself back up and continue on, because there are many times where she gets knocked down, many times where Ross gets knocked down, and they get back up and they continue on and they push forward. And that's really what kind of hit me, and I think what really resonated with me with this show. I mean, I've seen this hundreds of times. I have sunk a lot of time into watching this show, into watching this. I know practically the whole entire movie by heart as far as the dialogue goes. It's hard to kind of remember bits and pieces of the dialogue just sitting here talking, but if I were to throw it on, I could start reciting dialogue lines before the dialogue gets talked about, which was a thing that that friends of mine that I tried to show the show to, I had a hard time not doing that while watching it with them, which made it hard for them to see and enjoy. My bad, sorry guys. But it's all of that kind of, pushes into the whole thing, and I think is kind of, molded me into who I am today. And it's one of those things that I think now is the time to kind of share this with you guys. I mean, I've gone through some interesting hard times. I've been knocked down. I've lost jobs. I've been, and then I've have to sit down and just pick myself back up, get back up on the horse, find something new to do, and, really, better myself in the process. And I keep thinking back on this, and this is one of those reasons why I'm able to do that and not just, wallow in self-pity. It's time to get up and be the person I need to be. The old vernacular of time to man up and be the person you want to be. Yeah, okay, I'm a man, but that doesn't necessarily mean I need to man up and be the person I need to be. At the same time, I can just pick myself up and be that person. It doesn't have to be man up, as it were, but or woman up or whatever. This really kind of is good. And I'm not really sure how I want to close this out, to be honest. It's probably the most, looking back on this is probably the most real, I think, I've ever really gotten on the show. I usually kind of leave things to kind of talking about bits and pieces and randomly joke about my past and whatnot, but this kind of brings up some memories and some things that have happened. But it's what shapes everybody. Adversity is a way to grow. You can't grow without adversity, and this kind of shows that, and that's what I really loved, really enjoyed about Armitage. It's action. It is in some ways shapes and forms a bit on the adult side. There isn't a PG rating on this. There isn't isn't even, the standard, 16 and up or anything like that. But I'd say this is probably closer to a 16 and up. There is some partial nudity. There is definitely violence, a little bit of cursing in this. So it's not necessarily something that the young children should probably watch, though I think this is something that anyone 16 and up could definitely get into and enjoy. And I think younger generations could get into and enjoy this. I mean, I saw this when I was fairly young, and it did leave an impression on me. I don't think I've turned out bad from some of the things that are that are in this, but it definitely can play to all ages. But I'll leave that up to you or your parents or anybody watching me to to make that decision whether or not this is something you should really get into. And I guess to kind of sum this up, the back of the Pioneer tape here kind of sums up a little bit of it. This is a story about technology and emotion, about hatred and love, about a human on the verge of becoming a machine, and a machine on the verge of becoming a human. It is a story of survival. And in a lot of ways, I think that really does sum this show up. So yes, I recommend you go watch this. It was in my top 25 anime of all time. It is definitely a really cool movie to go see. If you have a chance to get a hold of the OVAs and watch that, I encourage you to watch that. It does have a slightly different storyline, but they all kind of have a very similar idea to that. But just for random noobs getting in, getting into anime, that Polymatrix is a good way to get in. It's a great gateway drug. There's no Japanese subtitles. There is no Japanese with subtitles. It is straight English dub, and it is one of the best English dubs, in my opinion, of pretty much every anime I've dealt with. Kiefer Sutherland does a really great job voicing Ross Syllabus, and I think Elizabeth Berkley brings something to the character that other voice actresses couldn't. I mean, if I remember right, Juliette Lewis played Armitage in the Dual Matrix movie, and I don't think her performance was anywhere near as good as Elizabeth Berkley's performance in this. And I don't believe Kiefer Sutherland came back to reprise his role as Ross in the Dual Matrix movie. But it's one of those it's really easy to get into, it's really easy to check out, and I encourage you to go out and take a look. It is... Armitage is one of those movies that I think everybody should watch. If you're a fan of film, if you're a fan of animation, if you're a fan of cyberpunk, synthwave, it's a great show to look at. And at the exact same time, if you just want a really engaging story about people, and really just people, and also what it means to be human, and survival and all this other stuff, this is a show for you. So once again, guys, if you've stayed with me up to this point, thank you for watching me up to this point. I know this is a talking head rambling video, laid out a lot of things that I don't normally lay out. This is probably, like I said, the most real in a lot of ways that I've been on this channel. And if you want to see more content like this, want to see more stuff like this, let me know in the comments section below. Let me know what your thoughts are about Armitage, what your thoughts are about other anime shows. I want to see those in the in the comments below. If you have an anime or some other piece of animation that's really touched you in a lot of ways, I encourage you, if you can, make a video about it, post it up online, and continue on this thread of anime, what animation taught us. And you know, this show really taught me to persevere, to be more, to pick myself back up, and you know, made me think about what it meant to be a person and how to be a better person in a lot of ways. So I encourage you guys to take a look at this. If you want to see more of my content, go ahead. There'll be a couple of clips in the ending clip, as well as, you know, go check out my channel. If you like this and want to see more, or want to see a lot more as they come out, I encourage you to hit that subscribe button and the notification button. Not sure what exactly it does, but you know, hit that as well if you want to be notified. I encourage you to hit me up on Facebook, Tumblr, Twitter. All of those social media links are in the description below, as well as a link back to to some of the original stuff that got me into or thinking about all of this, as well as a link to my website where you can view videos and comment and talk and whatnot. So I encourage you to, you know, take a look at all of those different places and do that, or follow me on, you know, social media or whatnot. I do post things from time to time, kind of giving previews about upcoming videos and the like. And yeah, I mean, if you like this video, thumbs it up. If you didn't like it, thumb it down. Let me know your thoughts, and more of my usual content will be coming up here very shortly, guys. But I want to thank you for tuning into this point. I appreciate you listening to me ramble on for as long as I have, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time. This is Nate, the old school otaku, sitting here with my love for Armitage III, signing off. Badge-toting terror in hot pants, I'll say. Okay.